Welcome everyone to SOC 312, Marriage and Family Relations. I'm Dr. Alan Moore, and the first part of our text examines the context of intimacy in our society. In this first lecture in Unit 1, we will be referring to Chapter 1. I want to tell you that the major theme of this text is understanding and enhancing the quality of people's intimate relationships. Intimacy is one of our fundamental needs and the source of much of our well-being and happiness. There is an abundance of research evidence that links intimate marital and family relationships with well-being, and this link exists from birth through adulthood. As we get started and as we proceed through the course, I encourage you to refer back to the course outcomes outlined in the syllabus and listed here. The purpose of each unit's activities and discussions is to lead us to these broader goals. By the end of the course, you will have a much better understanding of what makes relationships work and not work so well. In this unit in particular, our goals are as follows. We'll recognize some myths about family life and how they affect your own perspective on family. Describe some of the theories used to research and understand relationships and family life. We'll try to define what a family is. There have been dramatic changes in family structure over the years, and definitions have become broader to account for the diversity of families. You'll see what I mean in this week's discussions. We'll also discuss the issues facing non-traditional families and explain how culture shapes the structure and experience of families. As I've already pointed out, intimacy is one of our fundamental needs and the source of much of our happiness. This stresses the fact that we are indeed social creatures. As you read through the beginning of the text, you'll see the authors argue this point by looking at two phenomena. First, the experience of loneliness, which, as you know, can be quite painful for some. And secondly, the well-established connection between well-being and intimate relationships. The bottom line is we have a need for meaningful and significant connections with others. Consequently, we are on a quest for intimacy. On a fundamental level, relationships are a search for wholeness, completeness, or oneness with another human being. However, it is important to remember the reality that we are still two separate human beings. Issues such as dependency or manipulation show unhealthiness in relationships. Healthy emotional and physical boundaries are the basis of healthy relationships. Enmeshed relationships, however, lack these boundaries. Whether it's a relationship between family members, partners, or spouses, limits don't exist in enmeshed relationships, and boundaries are permeable. People in enmeshed relationships are defined more by the relationship than their individuality. In other words, they depend on each other to make them feel good, whole, or healthy, but they do it in a way that sacrifices their own psychological health. Their self-concept is defined by the other person, and they lose their individuality to get their needs met. Some signs of an enmeshed relationship are neglecting other relationships because of a preoccupation or compulsion to be in the relationship. The person's happiness or contentment relies on the relationship. The person's self-esteem is contingent upon the relationship. When there's a conflict or disagreement in the relationship, the person feels extreme anxiety or fear, or a compulsion to fix the problem. When you're not around this person or can't talk to them, there's an overwhelming feeling of loneliness. In healthy relationships, two individuals become us, stronger together than apart. The me and the you still remain separate entities, however, in conjunction with us. There are several myths covered in the text that exist in society, and they raise the question as to whether there can be an ideal form of marriage and family. We learn about family life from our own personal experiences and through the media. However, these sources provide limited perspectives and lead to myths and unrealistic expectations, which can actually damage or at least create difficulties in relationships. The happily ever after idea overlooks the challenges and the dragons that have to be battled along the way. Gorski identified three main things that we do wrong in a relationship, and they are expecting too much from a relationship, expecting too little from a relationship, and expecting a relationship to remain unchanged. The last point refers to the fact that relationships do change over time. We'll learn in a later unit about how the type of love you feel for each other and the type of self-disclosure that occurs in a relationship change as well. A well-known researcher noted relationships change over time, and so do the phenomena within them. Several myths about family life are addressed and refuted in Chapter 1. The first one is we've lost the extended family. This is a group of 3 or more generations. Even though it is not as common as it once was, there has been a recent increase in multi-generational households. The second myth is opposites attract. It is actually similarities that draw people together and keep them together. Birds of a feather flock together and stay together. The next myth is people marry because they love each other. In Unit 4, we'll have a guest speaker who points out that for a long time people married for practical reasons, and that marrying for love at one time was actually seen as being foolish. Some other myths we'll look at. Having children increases marital satisfaction. Actually, the arrival of children tends to decrease relationship satisfaction. Even though there tends to be a decrease, this doesn't necessarily mean the couple is dissatisfied. A good sex life is the best predictor of marital satisfaction. Many relationships fail despite a good sex life. And finally, happily married people don't have conflict, which of course we know is not true. Conflict is natural and inevitable in marriages and close relationships. What matters is how it is handled. The mere existence of conflict is not necessarily bad. Marital relationships have conflict because the great deal of shared intimacy and interdependence leave the partners more vulnerable to each other. But effectively working through conflict can actually strengthen relationships and increase cohesion. If we define a traditional family as one that stays intact except for death and is composed of an employed father, a stay-at-home mother, and children, then it is clear that this is now the choice of a minority of Americans. The family has had to adapt to changing societal conditions. Alternate forms of families, single parent, same-sex, and cohabitating couples are valued family units that have emerged and are just as fulfilling. Experts believe marriage and family patterns will continue to evolve. Many changes are occurring in family life and relationships, and some of these changes reflect long-term trends, while others are relatively new. Among these changes are increases in premarital sex and births to unmarried women. The rate of non-marital births has increased dramatically over the past several decades. More people are living alone or cohabitating without marriage. More are delaying marriage. More women are delaying having their first child until the mid-30s or even the late 30s. And birth rates are decreasing. Today, the birth rate is lower than what is necessary for the natural replacement of the population. And as would be expected, the average household size in this country has decreased. The average size has gone from 5.8 people way back in 1790 to around 2.5 in recent years. There's been a substantial increase in the number of employed mothers. Often this is necessary due to economic conditions, so children are left in daycare or with other family members. Finally, there's been an increase in the divorce rate in the past several decades, starting around the mid-1960s, and since the passage of no-fault divorce laws. This trend has actually leveled off, though, and is even beginning to decrease. And quite interestingly, the marriage rate is at its lowest level ever. There are benefits of marriage and family that we should take a look at. Research shows that overall, married men and married women are happier. People continue to place a high value on marriage and family life. About 90% of Americans say their own family is one of the most important part of their lives. 81% of females and 76.2% of males rated having a lifelong partner as a top importance to them. And the great majority of young people say they plan to marry, and they still view it as a lifelong commitment. Some other benefits of marriage and of staying married are companionship, intimacy, increased financial security, providing a stable environment for children. And divorce itself brings high emotional and financial costs. Divorce is never easy, but sometimes it is the best option. There's been a debate as to whether marriage is more beneficial to women or to men. And we'll explore what you think about that question in one of our discussions later in this course. What exactly is the best type of marriage is another question that has been raised. Some have even said monogamy should be abolished, while others praise the value of the lifelong union of the monogamous relationship. Statistics show a small percentage of U.S. adults practice open marriages and open relationships. Some of the theories you looked at in the pre-class assignment are systems theory, exchange theory, symbolic interaction theory, and conflict theory. Theories are used to help us understand what is happening in families and relationships. They also help researchers to make sense of the data they collect in surveys and in the epidemiological studies of changing trends. Each theory has a unique perspective, and they can be used alone or in combination to explain intimate relationships. Please study these various theories as we will be referring back to them throughout our discussions. Just as a very brief overview of these theories, systems theory is often used by family therapists, and the important aspects of this theory include the fact that we look at the family as a whole, as integrated parts, and we try to understand communication patterns within the family. Exchange theory involves a rational assessment of a situation. It does not explain all of family life, but it is clearly of value in our efforts to understand. Exchange theory is all about costs and benefits. Individuals weigh the costs and benefits of being in or staying in a relationship. Symbolic interaction theory stresses how individuals define the situation as important. People may be satisfied or dissatisfied with a relationship dependent on how it's defined. Even though it may not look very appealing to someone from the outside, the people in the relationship may interpret the situation and interactions as meaningful and important. And finally, there's conflict theory, which tends to take a broader perspective and looks at differences in social class and gender to provide explanations. Power struggles between men and women are sometimes examined through conflict theory. Conflict theory says power is the core of all social relationships. Conflict theory is also used to explain that much of the discrimination experienced by African American families is rooted in the competition between racial groups for economic and political advantage.